Hey, hold on one
Okay.
sec.
Thank you. Okay, Josh, it looks like before we call the meeting to order, Meg may need a little bit of support with her video if she wants to come on video today. So the recording has begun, and it is 9:01. My name is Catherine Delneo. I'm the State Librarian and Commissioner of the Department of Libraries and the chair of the working group on the status of libraries in Vermont. And I am calling our meeting to order. It is May 26th, 2023. And today we are meeting on the topic of library structures and organizations. I'm going to begin with roll call of our working group members. We'll go alphabetically by last name. And then we'll move to the Department of Libraries staff, Board of Libraries, and then other people who are present. So we'll get started. Meg Allison.
I'm here.
Hi, Meg. Thanks for being here. Maria Avery.
I am also here. Good morning.
Good morning. Jeanette Bear.
Yes, ma'am. And good morning.
Good morning. And I am here. And then Denise Hersey.
Here.
Wonderful. Christopher Kaufman Ilstrup.
Present.
I saw Christopher, but I didn't hear Christopher say here because maybe I'm having hearing problems this morning.
Sorry, I am here.
Okay, very good. Andy Kolavos.
Here.
Excellent. Kelly McCagg.
Here.
Great. Karen McCullough.
I am also here.
Wonderful. Susan O'Connell.
Good morning. I'm here.
Hi, Susan. And then Wendy Sharkey. Wendy may not be here yet, but hopefully we will see Wendy soon. Okay, we're gonna go next to Tom Frank, actually, who is the president of the Vermont Board of Libraries. Tom, are you on the call?
I'm here. I am
Excellent.
myself. Yep.
Thank you for joining us. And then from the department, we have Tom McMurdo.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Jeanette Schaefer.
Good morning.
Good morning. Josh Muse, our intrepid tech helper, who is here at the department in case anybody needs to come in person to access the meeting.
Good morning, all.
April Shaw.
Good morning.
Lauren Kelly.
Good morning.
Karen Gravlin. I know Karen's here, but I don't hear a Karen. But I see, there she is. She's waving. Okay. Joy Warland.
Good morning.
Good morning. Jonathan Clark.
Good morning.
And is Lily Talbert here this morning? There she is.
Good morning.
And Gina Rubin, who is our intrepid note taker, our minute human.
Good morning.
Gina has a new nickname for the record.
Oh no.
Gina the Hammer Rubin. So just she'll keep us on schedule behind the scenes. Don't worry. Okay. Are there any members of the working group or the department who haven't yet said they are here? I think we've got everybody. Oh, Kevin Unrath, you're not on my sheet yet. Kevin, welcome. Okay, and then we're just gonna check in with other folks who are joining us. I see Lawrence Webster is on screen. Good morning.
Bonjour.
And it looks like Patty Genadio is here as well. And I think that's everyone who is present right now. I see a hand up from Christopher Kaufman Ilstrup. Christopher.
Hi, this is a stupid question. I am looking for the chat button and it seems to have disappeared. Is it shut off?
It is not shut off. Occasionally that will occur. You might, one approach is to disconnect and reconnect, and sometimes that will convince it to come back.
Okay, I will
that-
do that.
Unfortunately, yeah, there's not a good magical solution, but sometimes that does the trick.
That's weird. What I was going to write in the chat, which I'm now interrupting people for, is I will miss the 11:30 presentation as I have to talk to my board chairs at that time. But I will be here the rest of the day.
Okay, thank you, Christopher, for letting us know.
I will leave and come back.
Wonderful. And then I believe Andy's leaving. Andy needs to leave early this afternoon as well. I do want to also share that I've noticed that Teams has been acting differently for me for the past probably 24 hours. And I think that there's been an update of some type that has happened that may or may not be an improvement, because it's been confusing to figure out how to share my PowerPoint, which has prevented me from practicing my PowerPoint, because I've been practicing how to share my PowerPoint in the new ways. So just we may see folks having a little bit of a technical thing going on. And so Josh is here to help us with that. And that could explain why something looks different for you, Christopher. Meg Allison has her hand up.
Good morning, Kathy. A couple of things. I'll need to step out from lunch and not be back until 2 p.m.
Okay.
And then the other thing I was noting, if we could make looking at the agenda, I don't think the report from Visla made it back to you. And so we have a 3-page report that Charles DeBritz worked on. So I was wondering whether that could go into public comment, or where I could drop that information in somewhere.
Let me just check on something. I feel like I saw Charles's. Did we not get it onto the?
That's right. It didn't. I don't see it on the agenda now, unless someone's.
It may not be on the agenda, but did we get it onto the into the testimony, the written testimony?
Oh,
it is in the written testimony.
Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah.
Super. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let's move on to, if there are no further things related to call to order and attendance today. That was a perfect question to ask. So thank you for that, Meg, about, do we have that on the record? So we'll move to agenda item number 2, the approval of the minutes of the working group meeting on April 21st, 2023. Thank you to Gina Rubin for writing those, for typing those minutes up. And thank you to Kelly for reading them carefully and finding some areas for improvement. I really appreciate that. And I know Gina does too. So the minutes that are posted on the working group's website that folks have had the opportunity to review, we have a possible action of approving those minutes today. So does anyone want to move to approve the minutes? And then we could do a second, and then we could discuss any further revisions.
So moved. This is Christopher.
Okay, Christopher has moved to approved. Can I get a second?
Kelly will second.
Wonderful. And now we can open up discussion of the minutes of our April 21st meeting. Does anyone have feedback on, any of the working group members have feedback on the minutes? Hearing none, I'm going to call for a vote to approve the minutes of the working group's April 21st, 2023 meeting. All working group members in favor of approving, please say aye.
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 Okay. All opposed, please say nay. The minutes are unanimously approved. Gina, again, for your great work on those. We're going to move into public comment now. If members of the public are here and wish to provide comment, if you could please raise your hand using the hand raise icon. If you can't find that and you're if you have If you're in the meeting online, you could turn your screen on, your camera on, and then I can see you and you can physically raise your hand. Are there any members of the public who wish to provide public comment? And this could also be Meg, if you wished to provide, since we didn't schedule Charles, because we didn't have the testimony, I think we got it a little late. If you wanted to share the VISLA testimony now on behalf of VISLA, that could be done in this public comment period too.
That's really generous of you, Kathy. I might just highlight some points and encourage the working group members to take a look at it in the written testimony. So our questions were, who makes up your membership? What is the cost to members? Your organizational role? What supportive services does your organization provide to members? And we are the Vermont School Library Association is the professional organization for Vermont school librarians. We have lots of members from currently practicing school librarians to retired members, as well as affiliated individuals and stakeholders. And we have about 200 members, active members. We pay dues between $15 and $35. It's on a sliding scale based on your professional salary. And one of the biggest assets that we provide to our members is our listserv and support, professional support, because oftentimes school librarians are the only school librarians in their building. But our yearly dues support advocacy, leadership, and professional development, including conferences. And we just partnered with the Vermont Library Association on April 3rd to provide a conference that had over 300 attendees in Burlington. And yeah, we support our members in lots of ways. We have a new mentoring program where every newly hired school librarian is matched with a mentor in their region or district. We advocate with the Agency of Education. We support members around issues of intellectual freedom, which of course book challenges have been on the rise in Vermont, and we know they are nationwide. We advocate for library issues on national levels. We've connected and created and strengthened partnerships with educational advocacy groups such as VitalLearn and the Vermont NEA and the Vermont Humanities Council. And yeah, we're robust and strong despite the pandemic and the strains that put on our organization and system. We supported our librarians through offering best practices through that time. VISLA is also in partnership with the Vermont School Board Association to update the model school board policy around material selection. And we've been able to successfully advocate to move the updated policy from a policy to consider to a recommended policy, which is a huge move. And yeah, we are still advocating with the Agency of Education to have a Vermont School Library delegate as a part of their staffing. We had a liaison at the Agency of Ed up until the early 2000s. We advocate for robust funding of positions in libraries. We often see that while librarian jobs are being chipped away at, certainly support staff and administrative support staff in libraries has decreased significantly, up to 47% since 2007 to 2019. So those numbers need to be updated, but we lost 47% of our support staff, which means librarians are pulled away from providing instructional, collaborative support to doing clerical work, such as checking out books and shelving, for example. And we have found that access to school library materials and staffing is not equitable across the state. There's great discrepancy in our VISLA salaries and library budgets. And recently we've done an identity audit to see who our membership is, which we are going to be using to fuel and inform our strategic planning. We have a 3-year strategic planning process that's up for renewal this summer. And so I'm working on a retreat plan for that. So on the horizon, we just see that we continue to advocate for the statewide adoption of our standards. We have national school library standards. We're currently working with the Agency of Education on steps for formal adoption. We have a large number of teacher turnover, so we foresee a continued importance of providing experienced mentorship to new librarians. As technology, educational technology leaders in our schools, we will continue to support the instruction of informational literacy at the earliest grades and partner with our schools and content level teachers. We will continue to be vigilant about the challenges to our students' intellectual freedom, and continue to support our members around advocating for staffing, adequate budgets, and library resources. And lastly, what improvements in statewide structures would help the libraries and library staff in the Vermont School Library Association? We do believe that increased communication and cooperation between the Agency of Education and the Department of Libraries to support school librarians would be a good thing to look to. We believe that this could be achieved through the restoration of a school library media consultant, which I spoke to earlier, that we had in the Agency of Ed about 20 years ago. Clear guidelines and consequences from the Agency of Education on what happens if a school district is not compliant with EQS standards, which are educational quality staffing standards for school libraries. It would be great if the Agency of Ed could take a larger role in supporting teacher mentoring by creating and providing training for mentors. Right now, we're taking that on as a part of VISLA. We'd welcome a partnership with them. We also would like clear ways for Vermont school librarians to support and give input on Department of Library initiatives that impact schools, such as the Vermont Online Library Resources. And lastly, structures and supports that would support our organization and vice versa, or updates and supports from the Department of Libraries around how to access, use, and benefit from Department of Library initiatives, such as the MAHEC program, the Vermont Online Library, movie licensing, and other shared resources to our schools. This can impact our new librarians and other new school staff who have access to these programs and discounts, but may not know how to access them. And just lastly, we greatly value our partnerships with our stakeholders, the Department of Libraries, the Agency of Ed, and we look forward to continuing our work together. So thank you for your time, and I encourage everyone for more details to look at that report in our written testimony.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your sharing the feedback of the Vermont School Library Association, Meg. And I want to say that I appreciate all of the institutions that provided responses to the questions that I sent them about their institutions. So I hope that everyone in the working group has had the chance to look at the testimony, the written testimony for today's meeting, because we did hear from a number of our organizations in the state and the consortia, the library associations. So we have some really rich written testimony in addition to the oral testimony that we scheduled for today. So thank you for that. Are there any other members of the public who are present today who would wish to share public comment before we move to our next agenda item? Not hearing any, I'm going to turn it over to April Shaw, who is the Department of Libraries Government Services Library Consultant. And April has prepared a Department of Libraries history that she's going to share with folks today to give a framing for our department's work, kind of its origins, how it formed, how it's changed over the years. And so I'm just going to turn it over to April now because her presentation speaks for itself. Thank you, April.
Thanks. All right, let me just share the right window. Okay, so let me send. Okay, So I can't see anybody. So if we have questions, I just need you to flag me down. So the institutional history of the Vermont Department of Libraries. And to review the institutional history, we are actually going to trace the history of two separate organizations. And the first one is the Vermont State Library. The Vermont State Library was started in 1825 when Robert Pierpoint, a counselor, introduced the resolution that the governor and the council should annually appoint some suitable person who would be in charge of the books and public documents that are deposited in the State House. At that time, the library was only open to council members and to the General Assembly when it was in session. Outside of that, the collections were not accessible to anyone. In 1838, we had the first state librarian who was paid for his services, and that was Jackson Vale. And at that same time, the state library became a repository for state publications and also first became responsible for the distribution of the Vermont reports. 2 years later, in 1840, it became a selective federal depository with the addition of congressional documents and speeches, and that is a service that is still going to this day. In 1841, the General Assembly first appropriated one-time funds for the purchase of books. And this was the first money they ever gave the state library, and it was used to buy 7 Bibles and 2 dictionaries. And then 8 years later was when the state library first participated in the exchange of state documents with other state libraries. And that continued until the early 2000s, at which point most of the state documents had gone entirely digital, and a large number of state libraries stopped participating in that exchange. And 1854 is when the state library first began receiving an annual appropriation for the purchase of books by the state librarian. And that first appropriation was for $200. January 6th, 1857 is the day that the State House was destroyed in a fire, which included the state library. At that time, Harvey Webster, the state librarian, removed books from the building as it was burning down. And as the tale goes, he was throwing books out the window onto the lawn to save them. And for the next few years, the library was moved around a couple different locations, in a private home and then in the Masonic Temple in Montpelier, until the current State House was completed. And then the State Library was established in what is now the Cedar Creek Room. And in 1886, the annex to the State House, which you may notice is the big building behind it, was built so that the state library could be there. And then the trustees approved a schedule change so it would remain open all year. Again, it was still only open to legislature. And in 1902, they hired the first full-time state librarian, George Wing. And in 1918, the building at 109, 111 State Street and the Supreme Court building were built. And that is when the state library became open to all Vermont residents. In November of 1927, all of Montpelier flooded, and that caused the loss of about 50,000 state documents in the state library. And those are the items that were stored in the basement and I think some of the first floor. And from here, we are going to jump over to a different organization, which is the Vermont Free Public Library Commission. And that was begun in 1894. And I wasn't able to find as many details about the very beginnings of this group. But in 1904, the first secretary for the Vermont Free Public Library Commission was Mary Titcomb, and she had the idea of using a horse-drawn wagon to carry books to small libraries and farming families. However, the commission denied her proposal. A few years later, she actually took that plan to Massachusetts and implemented a very successful program there. In 1922, the Vermont Free Public Library Commission did become the first New England state commission to own a motorized bookmobile. It was called the Alice Cooper Bandwagon, and it was given to the commission by the Vermont Federation of Women's Clubs. And it was named for Mrs. Omeron Coolidge of Rutland, who was the first president of the Vermont Federation of Women's Clubs and was a friend of Mary Titcomb, so would have known about her plans. And there is a picture of it right there. In 1923, the Free Public Library Commission was abolished, and the duties were assigned to the commission to the Board of Education, and it was then known as the Free Public Library Department of the Board of Education. And apparently they did not like that approach because in 1937, they appropriated adequate funds to set up a statewide regional library service and also reestablished the Free Public Library Commission and disestablished the Free Public Library Department of the State Board of Education. Also in 1937, the regional book wagons were established with the funding, and those were actually small library collections that were housed both in a regional book wagon and at a local public library space. And then in 1960, legislature abolished the Board of Geographic Names and transferred those responsibilities to the state librarian and renamed the Free Public Library Commission to the Free Public Library Board. And then the next year, they transferred those responsibilities to the Board of Trustees and the Commission, and it was renamed the Free Public Library Service with a 5-member board. And this is pretty much where you start seeing the Department of Libraries forming. Because in 1970, the state library merged with the Vermont Free Public Library Service, and we became the Vermont Department of Libraries. And the very next year, one of our largest services, which was Vermont Book Fetch, was launched. And for that service, the department published our catalog with supplements from participating libraries and local newspapers, the first of which was the Times Argus. For this service, people could fill out a form and request books be sent to them. In 1980, the department first automated their collections. And in 1987, the Vermont Automated Library System, VALS, was created. It's a union catalog where libraries that were members could submit their additions and deletions from their catalog to the department, and then staff members at the department would update it manually. And that continued for many years until 2017, when the VALS system was replaced with Share It by Autographics, which is what we know as Clover, the interlibrary loan system. And this system connects to library catalogs live via the Z3950 connection, which allows live status checks and removed the need to maintain a union catalog. I also wanted to add in some history about the regional libraries that were part of the department. All of the regional libraries opened in 1967 to 1972, and they were actually named after the largest town right next to them. So we had in 1967, the Rutland Regional Library and the Brattleboro Regional Library open. They were later renamed to Southwest and Southeast. 1968 saw the Montpelier Regional Library and the St. Johnsbury Regional Library, later named Midstate and Northeast. And then 1972 was the final regional library, and that was the St. Albans, and it was later renamed Northwest Regional Library. They were open for a fair number of years, and then between 1997 and 2018, they closed down, starting in 97 with the Northwest and Southwest regionals closing. In 2000, the Southeast Regional closed. 2010, Northeast closed, and those collections were merged with the Mid-State Regional Library. And then in 2018, the Mid-State Regional Library closed. In July 2018, the department moved all of its collections and divisions to its current location in Barrie, and we currently have a team of 18 staff members that provide services to libraries throughout Vermont. And it is also the first time that all of our staff have been under one roof. So that was kind of exciting for us. And for a little more information on the staffing, this is what our current organization staff chart is. It's 18 people. And this chart shows the history of the staffing with some of the significant events that occurred. So in 1971, we had 57 people. And in 97, between the two regional libraries closing and the AV division that we used to have closing, we were down to 38. Two more regional libraries closed. So by 2010, we were down to 26. Sometime in the 2000s, the HR positions that used to be at individual departments were swept by the Agency of Administration so that there was a centralized HR division for the state. So we were down to 25. In 2015, the law library closed and we were down to 22. We were down to 19 positions, I believe due to budget cuts in 2016. In 2017, the final IT position was moved to the Agency of Digital Services to consolidate government resources. And in 2018, Mid-State Regional Library closed, which brings us to our final count of 18 positions. And then one final note for the history is just tracing the state librarians that we have had from, I put 1969. I was aiming for Department of Libraries, state librarians, but James Ego, I believe is how it's pronounced, began as state librarian in 1969. So he was the one who was in charge during the transition from two separate organizations to just the Department of Libraries. And that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, April.
Pretty quick overview.
That was really very interesting and informative. And I want to open it up now to members of the working group for questions and comments. I see a hand, Jeanette Baer. I just unmuted and I'm not sure if people heard what I said before. So thank you, April. And I saw Jeanette Baer's hand up.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that back in 1894, 1895, when the legislature offered, I believe it was $100 to towns that had a library, was instrumental in forming the Rochester Public Library. That previously there had been a private subscription library in town. They closed their doors and turned over their collection to the newly created municipal library. And I believe a lot of libraries were in that situation back then. And that was a huge boom to small public libraries around the state.
Yeah, Jeanette, that's a great thing to remind us of. At the very beginning of our public library history in the state, we did have these funds that the state gave to communities establishing libraries. There's a really great map of this, and our colleagues at the Vermont History Center, they have the map and it's framed. And so anybody who wants to see a big, large map can see it. And I actually got one for myself that I have to get framed. Personally, I got it just to like hang someplace. So it's kind of cool to see. Some libraries actually got 2 grants, some got 1 grant, and the map shows the distinction. So there is this history of the state funding communities in that initial push for public libraries locally. Are there other questions? I just want to note that Andy in the chat thanked you, April. And I'm not sure if I was muted when I was saying how great your presentation was and how informative and how interesting. So I'm saying it again, because I really appreciate that you took the time to do that. And I know that Tom McMurdo also worked on this with you, and I appreciate all of the effort that your team did. You definitely are the info and access team pulling this together for us. Meg Allison.
Hi, that was very informative, April. Thanks so much for that. It's more of a wonder. I just want to put on the record. I wonder, with such a decrease in Department of Library staffing, what is the impact on services provided to the community? And I just want to have that question on record. I don't expect you may know the answer. You can certainly answer it, April.
I will say that we are never not busy.
I'm just making note of your question now, Meg. And if you can actually, committee, working group members, as you think of a question like that and as you raise it here, if you could actually take note of your specific questions so that we make sure that we discuss them later this afternoon, because I will try to remember each of these things, but I think also as you hear recommendations as you think of recommendations in response today to some of what you hear, just take note of them now so that it's easier at the end of the day to pull those together, if you would. I'm going to call on someone who's not a member of the working group, but who I think has valuable feedback. I hope that's okay for folks. Tom McMurdo has his hand raised.
Hi, I just wanted to add a comment about that question. I think one of the things that April traced in this presentation with the change from, I think it was 57 people in 1970, is there's also been a change, obviously, in technology, which has changed the way that the department does business. So think about everything on paper, more of a sort of clerical mission to, I think today we're in a position where we do so much that is technology based. And so I think in many ways, it mirrors the evolution of a library service, of course. I think the department has moved along with that, but just for some context, I've been with the department just over 10 years, and we had 26 employees when I started, and we have 18 now. So to echo what April said, we are never not busy. So thank you. But we're enthusiastic.
We are enthusiastic.
Small but mighty. That's what we are. We've got two hands raised. I think Jeanette Bear and then Susan O'Connell.
Hi. Okay, I'll be the bad guy here, but I do want to get it into the record. The closure of the Mid-State Library and the purging of massive numbers of books that were held at the regional libraries was a tremendous hardship on public libraries around the state, because not only were those books taken out of the state interlibrary loan network, and many of us relied on regional libraries like Mid-State to keep the older back catalogs of authors that we didn't have room for anymore. And those books were then gone. But also the huge increase of interlibrary loan load on small public libraries. Yes, the department does give grants of 50% of the courier fee, and that is a huge help. But it's the time for small public library staff to pull and process interlibrary loans for other libraries. This used to be at least, I don't know how many full-time staff of the Department of Libraries that process the majority of those interlibrary loans. Because back in the VALS days, those of us who have been around long enough to remember that, borrowing from a state regional library was the first book that you asked for. You only went to other public libraries if Mid-State did not have that book. So those positions, I assume, were gone. And then that workload fell on already overburdened small part-time public libraries to provide that service. So, you know, that workload that was removed from the Department of Libraries and your staff removed, then fell on unfunded mandates on small public libraries. So that's my complaint. And now it's in the record.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And working group members, I know that you are very kind and sensitive to the department staff, but please rest assured that you can feel free to share comments, even if they're critical of the people who came before us. That's fine. Or of us now. That your role is to participate fully and to share. So please don't feel that you need to apologize before you give a comment like that, Jeanette. We appreciate you. Our next person to speak is going to be Susan O'Connell.
Hi, thank you, April, for that. That was great. I was wondering, it would be really interesting to know a comparison of the per capita staffing of the Vermont Department of Libraries compared to other departments of libraries. I don't know if that's information that's easily available. I'm not sure if it's worth tracking it down if it's not easily available, but it seems like it would be interesting to know that.
Yeah, we actually have someone here on our call right now who's going to be presenting later today. So why don't, Susan, after Jeremy from COSLA speaks, maybe we can ask him if he knows if that data exists already. That would be something that possibly COSLA has already gathered, and I can also look into that as well.
I think that would also be hard to compare because different Department of Libraries and state libraries offer different services.
Mhm. It's true. We could do like, we could see what there is, and then we could see how it looks.
Yeah.
It certainly wouldn't be an apples to apples comparison.
Yeah.
But it might be illuminating in some ways.
Yeah, thank you for that idea. Okay, do we have any other questions, comments, based on April's presentation about departmental history? If not, I'd like to get started because my presentation is really long. So if I could get started, that would be great. I've been trying to do it as quickly as possible, and I'm a little bit concerned about the timing of it. So we're going to move to our next agenda item, which is agenda item 5. And I'm going to do something I haven't really done so far in all of these meetings of the working group, which is to be one of the presenters. I'm sharing an overview of Vermont statutes related to libraries in our state. And there's a PowerPoint available online. The one I'm about to share on my screen, I think we noticed a duplicate slide, so the numbers may be slightly off if you printed it out in advance. So I'll just warn you about that. And I'm going to try to share my window. Can you see my window?
It just popped up for me.
Okay, my notes are not on the screen, but is it true that my notes are not there, but my slides are?
Correct. I see the slides, but no notes.
Perfect. Sorry to be seeming like such a newbie with Teams after 2.5 years, but something updated yesterday that is confusing me. So to frame our conversation about library structures and organizations, I'll share an overview of state statutes and standards related to libraries in our state. I'm not seeing it move, which is driving me crazy. Hold on for a second.
I think I'm still on slide 1.
Yeah, I've tried to move it and it hasn't moved. So I just stopped sharing for a second and I'm ready to like lose my mind with this PowerPoint. I might just do it with my notes up instead of in slideshow because here we go. Let me try this. Okay, are you seeing the first slide, the title slide?
Yep, first slide is up. And
Okay.
it's the whole page of your PowerPoint, which I think is what you're intending.
Yeah. Okay. So moving to slide 2 now. Title 22, Libraries, History, and Information Technology, contains 16 chapters and covers broad ground. I'll share information with you about the chapters that most directly apply to our work in libraries. Those are chapters 2, 3, 4, and 13. I'm going to actually not start at the beginning. I'm going to start with chapter 4, which is library patron records. This chapter applies to almost every library in our state. Per state statute, a library's patron registration records and patron transaction records shall remain confidential. The statutory right of Vermonters to have privacy around their library records applies in all public libraries, all college and university libraries, and all school libraries. The law also applies in any other library or archive that is regularly open and provides access to materials to the public without a fee, either for in-house use or for circulation or checkout. Interestingly, Vermont archives, historical societies, and special libraries that provide the public with free access to materials in-house must also keep the library records of their patrons confidential. The statutory right Vermonters have to privacy around their library records applies in all of those libraries. And the definition of library here is very broad. Statute defines patron registration records as records that contain information a library patron provides to a library in order to have borrowing privileges at that library. The statute applies to any record that contains any information that must be supplied to the library to be eligible for borrowing privileges. The entirety of any such record is confidential under state statute, meaning that the statute seemingly even protects the fact that a person has borrowing privileges at a library. The definition of patron transaction records is expansive. In the context of our state statute, patron transaction records means library records that contain names or other personal identifying information that discloses an individual's activity within a library. The term library records includes the materials that a patron has viewed either in print or electronic form, the research questions that library patrons pose at libraries, materials in any format that the patron has requested through interlibrary loan, materials that the patron has borrowed, and any other library service or consultation that the patron has requested. That said, there are some exemptions to the confidentiality of library records. A patron can provide a library with permission to share their library records with another person. For example, someone might give their spouse the ability to pick up their library books. Per statute, that permission must be provided in writing. Those who work in libraries can look at a patron's record to the extent that it's necessary to do their work. But as we know, we should not look up library patron records out of curiosity or for any other reason. In Vermont, parents and guardians of children under age 16 are permitted to have access to their children's library records. However, in a school setting, the rules are slightly different, and parents and guardians of children are permitted to access their children's school library records. And that is covered, so there's the state rules around age 16, but if you're 17 or 18, but you're still in school, the Federal Family Education Rights and Privacy Act applies. And I've included a link to that in our presentation here. The federal law applies to schools and school libraries that receive funding from any program administered by the U.S. Department of Education. Vermont schools and school libraries should align their patron privacy policies with both state law and this federal law. I have added some red text here. The emphasis is mine. It's really important to note that according to state statute, libraries in Vermont should only provide law enforcement with access to a patron's library record in response to an authorized judicial order or warrant. finally, state statute addresses the statistical reports that library staff run in the course of our regular work. It's important that practices libraries use when running those reports is in compliance with state statute around privacy of patron records, and that libraries do not include personally identifying information in statistical reports. There actually could be consequences for libraries that violate these, that violate the confidentiality of patron records, because our state statute provides that any person whose confidential patron registration records or patron transaction records have been disclosed, except as provided in this chapter, is authorized to bring a civil action against the library that disclosed the records. Now we're going to move on to chapter 3, one that many of us know and love about public libraries. Public library means any library established and maintained by a municipality or by a private association, corporation, or group to provide basic library services free of charge to all residents of a municipality or a community, and which receives its annual financial support in whole or in part from public funds. Our state statute makes it clear both that free public libraries are essential to the general enlightenment of citizens in a democracy, and that every citizen of the state of Vermont should have access to the educational, cultural, recreational, informational, and research benefits of a free public library. It's important to note that while statute makes it very clear that every Vermonter should have access to a free public library, statute does not make clear the mechanism through which each Vermonter has that access. In Vermont, there are two governance structures for public libraries. We have incorporated and municipal public libraries. Both incorporated and municipal public libraries perform the same basic functions and provide the same basic services, so it can be confusing to understand the differences between them. There are also some folks who think we have a third type of public library, but these are the only two types of public libraries that we have. So the community libraries would be part of the municipal framework. That's my understanding. Vermont's incorporated public libraries are different from the municipal public libraries, basically in how they were formed. This is the distinction of the two types of libraries is really one of how the public library was originally formed. So the incorporated public libraries were typically formed when a bequest or donation was made to start a public library for a community. That donation led community members to form an incorporated entity separate from the municipality that would oversee the public library that serves their community. Municipal public libraries, on the other hand, were formed by municipalities to provide library services to the public. That said, some public libraries in Vermont have changed their type over time. For example, a public library that began as an incorporated library may have become a municipal library. It also could have happened in the opposite direction. But all of our public libraries fall within either the incorporated or municipal category by definition within state statute. So again, the few community libraries that we have in Vermont, which are public libraries that are housed in schools and also serve as school libraries, typically fall within the municipal public library category. Incorporated public libraries are nonprofit corporations that were formed to provide their community with free public library services. They have governing boards and they operate independently from the municipality whose people they serve. Incorporated public libraries form in a similar way that other nonprofit corporations form in Vermont, by drawing up documents of incorporation and filing those documents in the Office of the Secretary of State. Those documents include the name of the public library, the name of the municipality where the library will be located, and the names of members of the original board. Incorporated public libraries are governed by state and federal laws for incorporations and must adhere to the Vermont Nonprofit Corporation Act in Title 11B of the state statute, which governs nonprofit organizations in Vermont. And there's a link to that on the screen. Library trustees are completely in charge of their nonprofit corporations and decide how their libraries will operate. Incorporated library boards may decide to hire a library director, and if they do, The board supervises that director. Boards of trustees at incorporated libraries must have at least 5 members and no more than 15 members. On the other hand, we have the municipal libraries. Boards of municipal public libraries operate within the context of the municipality. Library trustees of municipal libraries are often appointed by the governing body of the municipality, but may also be elected by the community. That said, according to state statute, the library trustees of municipal libraries have full power to manage the public library, make bylaws, elect officers, establish a library policy, and receive, control, and manage property. Like incorporated library boards, municipal library boards must have at least 5 trustees. I don't believe that I have seen anything in statute that says the upper limit of how large a municipal library board can be. Like incorporated library boards, municipal library boards may appoint a director to run the public library. This next sentence I'm going to say, again, my understanding here, I am not an attorney, but it's not exactly clear to me from reviewing statute who actually supervises the director that a municipal library board appoints. In Vermont, both municipal and incorporated public libraries are tax exempt. Public libraries are encouraged to refer to any available publications and guidance issued by the Vermont Department of Taxes related to state tax issues and Internal Revenue Service documents related to federal tax issues. And as always, libraries should consult with competent legal counsel if any tax questions arise. While this next slide is not covered in statute, as the working group is meeting on the topic of structures and organizations, I do want to share that typically the responsibilities of both municipal and incorporated public library boards in Vermont include reviewing and updating bylaws, creating, reviewing, and updating library policies, conducting strategic and long-range planning, hiring and supervising the library director, establishing the library budget and requesting funds from the municipality or municipalities that they serve, stewardship of the library buildings and grounds, meeting regularly and effectively, being a champion for the library, and ensuring compliance with funding and grant terms. I'm going to very, very quickly share with you an overview of Chapter 13 of Title 22, which covers the work of the department. The work of the department is actually outlined in 2 sections, duties and functions, which is Section 5, and then Section 6, which is other duties and functions. I'm not going to read the full document to you, but just want to mention a couple of things. With regards to number 1 of 605, Section 605, duties and functions, the department no longer has a law library collection or a law librarian, and now meets the goal of providing access to legal resources and references through a grant to the Vermont Law School's CLIC program. The department meets the statute in terms of providing state of Vermont employees and the legislature with access to legal documents through a contract with Westlaw, which state employees are provided if they have duties that require its use. Number 4 relates to the general collection of sufficient size and scope to reinforce and supplement resources of local and regional libraries. And just a note on that, with the closure of the regional outlets of the state library and the downsizing of its space to hold physical collections, the department has turned toward providing more online resources to the public. This statute is a key reason that we have built out our offerings at the department through the Palace app and why we provide online databases to the public. And with number 6, I just want to call that one out because we have statutory responsibility for providing collections, physical collections and online collections to institutions, state institutions, correctional institutions and institutions for the treatment of persons with mental conditions or psychiatric disabilities. So we provide physical collections directly to the 6 state correctional facilities, the state psychiatric facilities, and also to the Veterans Home. And then number 7 relates to the work that we do through the ABLE Library, providing library service to blind Vermonters. We're also building out collections of materials to support Vermonters with other disabilities and learning differences. And then when we get to the other duties and functions, in number 1, the department administers funding annually from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. We're also empowered by statute to apply for and administer other federal funds. Most recently, the department has administered CARES and ARPA IMLS funding. We've also sought and received funding from the U.S. Department of Treasury and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to support capital improvements projects at public libraries in our state. And I'm really excited to let you know that our Treasury application has finally been truly approved, and that we will be able to now not be so nervous that they won't approve our actual application. So we received that notice within the past week. Number 2 relates to the consultation services. So we have a team of library consultants and the assistant state librarians, and even me as a state librarian, we provide regular consultation to libraries throughout the state. And number 5 on this page is really where we have statutory authority to provide continuing education. And while it's not called out in statute, we also offer the Certificate of Public Librarianship program. So those are both things that we do to meet our statutory obligations. I'm going to very quickly move to chapter 2. This is a chapter that I'm going to be frank with you, I do not know very much about, and I've reached out for more advice on this interstate library compact. But my understanding is that the history of it is that in 1963, the state librarians of Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Vermont formed an interstate library compact. Immediately after it was formed, the state of New York joined on, and over the years, many other states have joined this interstate library compact, and there are currently 35 participating states. The general intent, just a very high level, because as I said, I'm still trying to understand what this means, and we haven't been leveraging it in recent years. The general intent of the Interstate Library Compact is to facilitate shared services across state lines, both in serving regional populations and in cooperative purchasing. I'm going to move now to the minimum standards for Vermont Public Libraries, which went into effect on November 1st, 1986. And having gone through the state's rulemaking process and having been approved by the Vermont Legislative Administrative Rules Committee, these standards are currently in place and have the force and effect of law. The minimum standards for public libraries in Vermont emphasize 4 essential areas: public service, public access, interlibrary loan cooperation, and community involvement. I'll just cover the general themes and not read the whole entire slide because you all can do that on your own and likely have already. So the public should have access to library services. A public library draws support from its community and should spend its money responsibly. You'll notice in number 7 that there's a suggestion of $3 per capita. My mathematical skills are not always the best, the most excellent, but when I did some running of numbers a couple of months ago, it's about $7 to $8 today, because this was 1986, $3. So if this were to be updated today, this would be a different number. Public libraries should cooperate with other libraries to broaden their services. A public library must have a librarian responsible for its overall operation, but you'll also notice that a Master's of Library Science degree is not necessary in Vermont. Number 19 deals with what the training and education would be. So it would be that they possess either a library science degree or a Vermont Certificate of Library Training, or that they're actively working toward one of those in the past 12 months. The Board of Trustees represents the community and is responsible for policymaking. A copy of the current policy must be filed with the Department of Libraries. And finally, a community library, a combined school public library, or a public library located in a school or other multi-purpose building, such as the town clerk's office, the senior center, the grocery store, must make special effort to meet the needs of the general public. Because they're a little bit different. So statute is, I'm sorry, not statute, the standards are saying basically that those are, the setting is a little bit more challenging. So they need to really be sure to provide full access and full service. All of this said, the document clearly states that meeting standards is purely voluntary. So again, these standards have the force and effect of law. And this sentence is also in them. So it's an interesting circumstance and one that the working group may want to look at. The Department of Libraries provides service to all public libraries, whether they meet standards or not. It may, however, offer additional services to those public libraries which meet standards. To update or replace the minimum standards for public libraries in Vermont would require the department go through the rulemaking process per the Administrative Procedure Act, following the rule on rulemaking. This process is typically initiated by departments and must involve community engagement per the established process. I'm going to now just really quickly cover a couple more topics that do apply in our public libraries settings or that are recommended. And you'll notice the next 3 slides, it's really a matter of municipal, you're required, and incorporated, you are recommended to follow these. So the Vermont Secretary of State's Guide to Open Meetings is a great resource for public bodies because in Vermont, public bodies must adhere to the Vermont Open Meeting Law. Per our minimum standards for public libraries, all public libraries are encouraged to meet once every 3 months in meetings that are warned and open to the public according to public meeting law. That said, municipal public libraries are public bodies, so must adhere to the Vermont Open Meeting Law. And incorporated public library boards are not public bodies, so they're not required by law to adhere to the Vermont Open Meeting Law. But again, they're encouraged to do so by the department through the minimum standards. Records retention is another important one. How long does your library board need to hold on to documents? The Vermont Secretary of State has just updated some agency-specific rules about records retention with the records retention schedule for municipal library boards of trustees. These are available online. There's a PDF on the screen. Municipal public library boards must adhere to the agency-specific record schedule for municipal library board of trustees. Incorporated public library boards are not public bodies. They're not municipal libraries, so they're not required by law to adhere to the public. I'm sorry, this should say to the records retention law. I'll correct this slide, but they're encouraged to do so because they serve the public. And access to public libraries. So this is basically if someone requests information of your library, must you reply to it or not? Must you provide the emails? Municipal public library boards must adhere to statutes pertaining to the access to public records. So if you get an information request, you must respond to it, and you must do so within the time frame that's outlined by legislature in Title I, Chapter 5, access to public, Subchapter 3, access to public records. Incorporated public library boards are not public agencies, so they're not required by law to adhere to statute pertaining to access to public records. But again, we encourage them to do so. And now I'm going to stop talking and open it up for some questions from our working group members. If you're not asleep. I hope you're not asleep. please come back on screen. Let me know you're here. Unmute. Feel free to jump in. I know you're all awed by my riveting review of statute.
Kathy,
I'm
thank you
here.
for thank you for that really great summary. I learned a bunch. And I don't really have any questions because it was very comprehensive.
Well, you're very welcome. I tried to summarize it, and I'm sure that there are more details that people might want to know once they sort of digest it. Are there any questions or comments or thoughts?
This is Kelly. One thing that I didn't hear you mention, and it's just kind of a nuance, here in Colchester, we are municipal, but we also have a town charter. And so that town charter actually specifies that the town manager is the one who is my direct boss and is the one who hires me. And the board is more advisory. They set the policies, but they're more advisory as far as being like, you know, my supervisory type thing. So I know that's unique compared to most.
Well, I'm kind of curious about it too, because statute says that the board appoints. So how does the town charter play with statute?
I don't know. It was recently reviewed by the town attorney, like within the last few years. And for some reason, the town charter supersedes the statute.
Interesting.
Yeah, you can look into it or whatever, but it was
Yeah.
a big kind of kerfuffle and discussion. But because I guess it's because most towns don't have charters.
Yeah, it's curious. I might be, maybe share it with me, because I am a little bit interested in that. We do get questions from municipal libraries about who's my supervisor. And there can be these debates, and it seems really good, like at least that the supervision is clarified. But it is interesting if the state statute says the board appoints, but the town charter says that the municipality appoints. So that's not that I would question this, but that I am curious about it. And this may be something that the working group wants to make a recommendation about improving the clarity of statute so that it's less confusing, because you would not believe how many questions of this type that we get, and we are not the arbiters of it at all. And it's like, it seems confusing, and it seems different that it's not, the supervision of the municipal library directors is not super clear in statute to me.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm happy to send that.
Thank you. Andy.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, say that at the Brownell, as far as I understand, or as I've been told, it's the same situation. The director is supervised by, I think, ultimately the city manager at this case. And while we have a role in hiring, that role from what I could tell, was more advisory than anything else. And honestly, I can't speak for them, but speaking for if I were in that position, I'd much rather work for the town than a board, particularly when the town has got a municipal union in place. But just wanted to share that.
Yeah.
Yeah, in my situation, the issue came up during COVID because we were discussing whether or not, do we close the building? Do we not close the building? And I was literally getting texts and phone calls from 6 different people. And I was just like, I don't know who I'm supposed to listen to. I don't know who trumps who, and so that's kind of when it came to a head before. And even still now, everyone works really well together. But at the point of chaos, people weren't communicating greatly, I guess you would say. And so that's how it came up, and it's been resolved, but I'm glad it's been delineated.
Yeah, I don't think that you're unique in that area of having that confusion. And it is interesting how sometimes it takes a crisis to get some clarity. But wouldn't it be nice if in the crisis we weren't also having kind of existential crises? If we understood from the beginning who was in charge of who supervised and who hired and everything. Jeanette and then Meg.
Hey, so you raised the issue of the stewardship of library buildings and grounds. I think especially with municipal libraries, that's a challenge in that the trustees may be more familiar with the building's needs, but the select board controls the funding for building repairs. And, you know, clarifying exactly what power the public library trustees would have to spend municipal funds on a municipal building.
Yeah, it is. The ownership of buildings is not necessarily called out in statute, and that's another, and the relationships between them, and each of those seems individual, which is really kind of a fascinating thing with 186 plus institutions. That's kind of the perpetual question. Meg?
I was going to say, Kathy, Tom here. I can't raise my hand. It won't let me.
Oh, okay. Tom Frank is our Board of Libraries chair, so he's just going to jump in for a second. Tom.
I was just going to say, I was trustee of the Milton Public Library for 5 years, and we hired a new director who happened to be from Ohio, Scott Murphy, who then later it was Kathy's predecessor as state librarian. And baptism by fire, because we went through the thing that the manager wanted to hire and fire the director, and there was a 4-year fight between the town and the library trustees. And we relied on the library a lot just for advice. But yes, that would be important if that was clarified a bit. And now the trustees still hire and fire the director, which is good, except when they didn't keep one of the directors and found out the library out of our budget had to pay for the unemployment insurance that we did because municipalities usually don't carry unemployment insurance because it's cheaper to just suck it up. There's not a lot of turnover. So that's just my comment on that.
Thank you, Tom. I did just put into the chat what statute says. So there are a lot of things that may be happening. And then there's what statute says. So the statute very clearly says that the board has full power to manage the public library, make bylaws, elect officers, establish a library policy, and receive, control, and manage property which shall come into the hands of the municipality by gift, purchase, devise, or bequest for the use and benefit of the library. The board may appoint a director. That's what statute says. So whatever's happening locally, this is still what statute says. So I'm just gonna let's put a pin in this line of conversation, because it sounds like there may be a lack of clarity locally on what statute says. The board may appoint a director. Now, that usually means that they don't have to. They could have volunteers. The board could directly supervise every single person and not have a director. Somebody else might interpret that maybe there's leeway for the municipality to appoint the director. So there may be a legal question in the wording of this, but as far as the power of running the library, versus being an advisory board. This is what statute says, and I'm not an attorney. This is just, I'm just reading the words on the page. You'll notice I tend to just read the words on the page for that reason, because something I've noticed a lot is people want the department to provide legal counsel, and none of us in the department are qualified to do so or have that in our job scope. So I just want to clarify that as well. When you look at the organizational chart, you do not see JD after any of our names. And if you happened to, that still does not mean that we should be providing you with legal counsel. That's my exercise in limit setting for the day. So I'm going to call on the next hand, who I think, Meg Allison, you've been waiting really, really patiently. So let me call on you.
Thanks, Kathy. And again, my apologies, I can't turn on my video camera. I will try turning it all off at lunch. That's what Joshua suggested. When I come back, maybe it'll work. So legal advice. My question is a little too late then, Kathy, but no, seriously, the privacy of library patron records is what piqued my interest, because in school libraries, there's a lot of questions, and it's murky because we have our state statute and we have FERPA law and we had federal law. So I would love to see a recommendation, some language, clear language that's communicated to all school librarians who work in high schools with students who are 16, 17, and 18, or 17 and 18-year-olds, around the privacy of their records. Because at my school, you know, every year we have a conversation with our office staff who's trying to collect all the materials back, textbooks, library books, uniforms, and you know, their diploma is tied to getting that material back. So I would love to see, like, really cut and dry, this is the protocol language shared with schools, because if I'm struggling with it year after year, reading it, making sure I'm doing the right thing, no doubt others are as well.
If I'm putting my hand up for a second because I want to just react to that before we move to the next comment. In our most recent meeting on intellectual freedom last month, we had some discussion around should the working group recommend a change to chapter 4, let's see, section 172B4 that there's an exemption rather, for patron privacy for custodial parents or guardians of patrons under age 16. So there's that. And then there's this thing about schools, you all have to follow the federal rules. Changing the age, lowering the age, my guess is that recommending a lowering or removal of the age for children to have privacy of patron records would only impact would only impact public libraries, but the schools would still have to follow the federal guidance.
And what's interesting is with 17 and in particular 18-year-olds, right, who, you know, can actually sign to have their records not shared with their parents. I mean, that might be a per school case where 18-year-olds can like sign their own permission forms and sign themselves out of school. You know, it would be, I'm curious about that piece as well.
Yeah, I think that's an area that we should look at more closely, because I think in the public library, my sense from talking with folks in public libraries and from what we heard last month, the public librarians were kind of saying, why is it so high? And it is, 16 is quite high compared with other states, some of whom don't have that caveat, or some of them have a much lower age, like 9. But then if it was high because, oh, well, we need it for schools, which was sort of what we heard last month, we actually don't need it for schools, is I think the case. We would need to get legal counsel on this, but it could also be that the working group make a recommendation that the legislature look at changing the age, and that the working group doesn't recommend a specific age.
Yeah, that would be most appreciated for sure.
Yeah. And we could also recommend clarity around the school, but it is tough because I would really recommend that schools make sure they're in alignment with the federal, because if the state has something that doesn't comply with federal, the federal, I believe, takes precedence. Just like if a municipality had a local rule that didn't comply with the state takes precedence. Jeanette Baer?
Hi. I just wanted to go back to the question of who supervises the library director. And in the Department of Libraries publication, The Law of Public Libraries, it has referred to the 2002 Vermont Supreme Court case, the Hartford Library Trustees versus the town of Hartford, that clarified that it is indeed the trustees who are in charge of the personnel issues with the library director, not the select boards.
So, Jeanette, that's
But it
a
also says under, let's see, on page 5.
Can we pause for a second? Because I want to say something as the department head. That document contains factual errors and we have removed it from the website for that reason. I would not refer to that document any longer, and I don't think the working group should refer to it. The Supreme Court case law absolutely stands. But that document, if you look at the patron privacy information, it's just not correct. There are a number of errors that I found when reviewing it, and we've pulled it from the website.
Good to know.
Yeah, it's a little bit. That's why you don't see me referring to that. And that's why you see me pointing back to statute, because over the years, there's been like this narrative that has evolved that is, and people have been referring to that document, but we've identified a number of errors in the document that it's not that something has changed with patron privacy in Vermont since that document was issued. So there's, I just want to like not refer to that, but part of what's pretty crazy is the case law refers to it. I think I looked at the case and it's a little bit like it becomes circular. But the Vermont Supreme Court has, I think, only that one ruling related to libraries, and that was what they found. So there is a bit of a, like, if I were a puppy, my ears would be like, so sorry to jump, Kelly. Do you want to finish speaking? Sorry.
No, I just looked through it and looking through what our attorney said, and there's a statement that says, unless the town has a charter, that, and I just turned it off because I had lost the words, but I'm emailing it to you right now.
Okay.
That the town charter supersedes basically statute, and it says that specifically.
Okay. Well, that will be interesting to look at, and again, it's hard for us all, I think, because we know how things are, but then we also recognize we may not have a full understanding, and then there's like sometimes things have deviated, and I think some of us may be in the deviation zone, and some people it may look like you're in a deviation zone, but you're totally in the right. So like that, we're not here to, the working group's not here to like call out differences, but it is kind of, it is a little bit confusing for sure. It is almost 10:30, which means I think that I need to move to our next item to keep us on track. And I appreciate everyone's really great engagement around the statutes. You know, sometimes that can be a little bit dry, but I love that you all are digging in and thinking about it and reading it. So thank you all for your participation. I'm going to turn it over next to my trusted colleague, Tom Frank, who is the chair of the Vermont Board of Libraries, and he's joined us today by phone because he's being subjected to some kind of an improvement of his internet access, which is not an improvement for him at all today. But I really appreciate that Tom is here with us. And Tom, it's 10:30 now, and you'll have till 10:40 to share your comments, and then we'll do about 5 minutes for questions from the working group.
Okay. Quickly, thank you for inviting me. Yes, I'm Tom Frank, chair of the Vermont Board of Libraries. Now, the Board of Libraries is a 7-member board appointed by the governor. Before, we had problems getting new members and all of that, and actually we kept too long for a long time until Kathy figured out this should go through HR. So from not being able to find new members for years, we had 3 openings and we had 8 applicants. So, and we tried to do the board, at least I push it, to do geographic. So we have people from the South and Northeast, Northwest, and not everybody from Chittenden County. I lived in Barton for 10 years, and people moved to Chittenden County because it's so close to Vermont. So we try to get a diversity of people's vocations, occupations, what their point of view. The board has 2 basic responsibilities. Number 1, geographic naming. It's kind of strange, but it's in the statute that if you're going to name or change a name of a lake, river, stream, mountain, hill, whatever, not roads or bridges, because the Department of Transportation has that, you fill out a petition that is now online, and I'll say Kathy and her staff's done a fantastic job to getting all of that online. We did not have it before, and we've also created and updated our policies, and the policies are also posted online. So if you have a stream that you want to change the name of, and you might remember in the news, Negro Brook, that came to us, and that was quite controversial. It took us about 2 years to get that out, and we finally did it. So it isn't necessarily a fast process. It can be fairly long and drawn out. And it doesn't seem all that important, but when we approve a name, you come there and we look at it from the historical perspective, the landowners, all sorts of criteria that we look at. And if we approve it, we then send it down to Washington, or is it in Reston, the Geographic Naming Board down there with the federal government. They quarterly look at all these name changes across the country, and they too will decide that it meets their standards, and if it does, approve it. Then it goes into the database, and Rand McNally, Apple Maps, Google Maps, all of those mapping programs will look at that database. So the fact is, it's very important because this is what around the world people use to look at names for Vermont geographic names. Also, it's important because for the Natural Resources Board or any other state agency, if we say you're going to Smith Stream, they know exactly where we're talking about for 911, because there's there's some confusions. If you say Mud Pond, there are 6 mud ponds in Vermont, and we would not permit that in the future to name another pond Mud Pond. You want to change the name, that would be good. So that's the one thing that we do. The other thing is we're strictly advisory to the state librarian. Kathy can take our opinions or not. We meet quarterly, though. For example, changing the name, we needed to meet again so we can have special meetings. But basically, we meet quarterly, January, April, July, October. Yeah, there we go. And for 2 hours, 10 to 12, we always met in person at the state library in Barry. But with COVID, we went to Teams. And you can't see me, you're lucky, because I'm on the phone and can't get in by the internet, so you don't have my picture to see. I'm legally blind. I tell people it's opposed to illegally blind, which means I can't get a ride, and I live in Milton, so it's a real pain, and especially in the wintertime. So Teams has made it fairly easy. Those that can get to Barry, we do, and those that can, especially during snowstorms, or if you're down in Bennington, Brattleboro, I believe this will really help our members participate more. Kathy can talk about the advice, because are looking at things, once again, the state, the report that you're going to be producing is of great interest. As I mentioned, in Milton, we had a lot of problems with this, and the state charter, I mean, the town charter took precedent, but they did not provide legal help, but the state librarian headed us to the right direction to look up where it was in statute and that Supreme Court ruling. And we went by the ruling itself, I believe, and not that document Kathy is referring to. So I don't know what my timing is there, Kathy, but there's probably some questions folks have on what the Board of Libraries does.
Yeah, sure, Tom. You have 4 more minutes if you wanted to keep talking, or we can just move on to questions. Can I just share one thing that you do?
Yes, sure, please.
So I want to just be sure folks know that one thing that the board is really involved in is selecting the state librarian. So statute says that after consultation with the board, the Secretary of Administration, with the approval of the governor and the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint a state librarian for an indefinite term. So the board is involved in appointing the state librarian. The board is also involved in removing a state librarian. So the secretary needs to consult with the board before they remove the state librarian from office. Now, consultation, it doesn't say that the secretary needs full approval for the board. It just says that the secretary needs to consult. And I'm popping the specific statute about the appointment of the state librarian and their powers and duties into the chat for you.
Yeah, and when we were doing the interviews, it was Bruce Post, who was chair at the time. I, as another member of the board at that time, and the secretary of the Department of Administration. So there were the 3 of us that were doing it. And then once again, look at that and then sent that. I think she had the authority, or if not, sent it to the governor to approve.
Yeah.
So yes, that's another thing that we do. But once again, in an advisory manner only.
It's interesting to look at the language of the statute that relates to the appointment of the state librarian and the powers and duties. It could be something that the working group suggested, that the public library, the incorporated, and the municipal public libraries be clarified with the same type of structure, because one of the other questions people have sometimes is, what does the director do? Like for me, it's clear in statute that as the administrative head of the Department of Libraries, that the state librarian appoints and engages employees of the department. So having that kind of language, like the board of the libraries appoints, and this is the process, or whatever it might be for municipal, and then to clarify what the director can do next. It seems like this portion of statute might be a guidepost for how to make a specific recommendation of how we might want to see statute changed.
And I would also say the board, when we're doing the advice, I always tell the members, you are the eyes and the ears around the state. If you see problems, if you see good things, bad things, or whatever, bring it back. We're on the board to give advice. Just let Kathy know these are issues that are cropping up there that are probably going to need to be addressed. That would include censorship, controversial, or once again, municipal management. How are legally, although you don't give legal advice, I was thinking maybe you do, what is it? You give examples. I'm thinking of how to do that. Case scenario, this happened. So libraries can look and see, well, this library did it this way, or be an anonymous one, but a library did it this way with this result.
Mm-hmm.
No questions? Okay.
I'm going to put a link to the statute related to the Board of Libraries into the chat too, so people have that. And I'm just going to open it up for questions of the members of the working group. If you have any for Tom?
Either they all fell asleep.
You're all so
they,
quiet.
I did such a great.
I'm just trying to think of anything else about the board that we might just want people to know. Maybe Tom, do you know, so the board meets, typically meets 4 times a year. How much of the time of your meetings in general is dedicated to advising the state librarian, and how much is dedicated toward geographic naming?
Historically, since I've been on it, about 80% has been geographic naming, and very little advising the state librarian. However, I think now that we have the policies and the procedures all set down, it shouldn't be nearly as long. Before, the department did a lot of the work, research on the naming, getting letters from the trustees, from the Historical Society, from one of the 4 recognized Abenaki tribes in Vermont, just seeing if there was another name for that geographic location. But now, and thanks to Kathy, and quite correctly, we're putting the onus on the petitioner that they need to go get these letters and do better research. So when the application comes to it, it's pretty complete. And then we can just review it and say, okay, you missed this part or whatever. Are you willing to do it? Yes. Okay. Go back and get it. And then should speed up the process tremendously and not be so long.
Yeah, and it's great that the board was open to those changes, because it was really, I think it helps the department staff too. And now that we have so many fewer staff, we went back to the statute and looked at how should it be done. And so kind of refocused that the petitioner is the one who builds the case, and the department isn't really their personal research librarian in that same way. We might support them with using our collections, but we're not making a report, building a case for them. That in state statute, that's their job. At the federal level for geographic naming, the federal government has staff who do research for them, but that's not how our state statute has it set up. I want to call on Tom McMurdo to share some information. Tom?
Hi, good morning. I probably should know this, but I'm wondering, I was surprised when I came to the Department of Libraries to find out that the state librarian has geographic naming responsibilities. Are we aware of any other state library agencies that have that responsibility?
I am not. Vermont is unique. That, and we have and Kathy, you can correct me if, and Vermont has a specific process to do it, and who does it and all of that. So that, I think that's fairly unique, is it not?
Yeah, and I'm seeing a chat message from Jeremy Johansson from COSLA, and he's saying not that he's aware of. And Vermont's process, there's a uniqueness, not just that the state library is involved with it. And really the way in which I'm involved with it is I'm the secretary of the board. So I don't vote, I don't make a presentation. Gina and I facilitate it, and with help from April usually, facilitate this process. But Vermont is unique in a couple of ways. We require physical signatures from 15 people. We need one unique petitioner. There has to be a petition at the beginning, or it has to come from an agency or department of state government. And in other states, they don't have any local naming. They just defer to the U.S. Bureau of Geographic Names at the federal government level. And in other states, it might start with the feds and then the state reacts and changes the name locally with their local board. But in our case, the feds can't really act until we've locally done something. We're the only state that's that way. And so unless
we
they
need
do
the
an edict,
petition
like you're
with
going to
the-
replace every name like this with that. So,
And then we have as long as we have the required number of signatures on the petition, and that actually we looked at it, and Kathy and our legal representative checked it out. It doesn't say they even have to be Vermonters, and it doesn't say the age. So, one scenario would be the fifth grade class wants to name a stream in their area that hasn't been named. If we get the required number of signatures from 25 residents in fifth grade, we'd really like to look at that, because that means they're getting Vermonters involved.
yeah. Thank you to Lawrence Webster, who has joined the meeting, and we'll be hearing from Lawrence later today, but Lawrence put a link into the chat to answer the question of the other states' geographic naming authority. I do want to move to our next presenter because we'll be late otherwise, and that will eat into our break. So, group members, if you're willing to forego your break, I can take the two hands, but I think we should probably keep moving along. Okay, hands went down when they heard they wouldn't get a break. Jeremy, you're here from COSLA, and Jeremy Johansson's the executive director of COSLA. He's a great resource for state librarians around the country and the world. We have folks who are in remote regions, who are in U.S. territories, and COSLA supports them, plus the 50 state library administrative agencies. And I've invited Jeremy here today to just give us kind of an overview of where we fit, what state librarians do in the world. And I recently got a really cool thing, Jeremy, hang on.
I know what Kathy's going for.
And this is people here in our group. Oh, you've got it too. People here in our group, we have noticed that if you've seen one Vermont library, you've seen one Vermont library. And COSLA, the COSLA mug says, the COSLA kind of quiet slogan, which is, if you've seen one state library, you've seen one state library. There's so much diversity. There's so much difference. There's so much happening out there. And so, Jeremy, good luck trying to share with us what that is. And I'm going to turn it over to you. You are going to have from now until about 20 minutes from now. So around 10:48, and then we'll do questions. Oh, wait, is that right? Yeah, and then we'll do, that's not right. 10:48 is now. You'll have about 20 minutes, and then we'll do about 10 minutes of questions. So thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. So yes, and Tom, I want to follow up because I want to find out if, since you've got all this naming power, maybe can you possibly change Vermont to the metric system? I think that that's not a reach, and you can make that happen. So I will tell you that I did try and sidestep Kathy's invitation. I was like, I'm not the right person. There's someone who knows way much more about this than I do. But she assured me that I know enough, and probably hold a unique spot in that I have had a hour-long conversation with every state librarian in the country over the course of the last year and a half that I've been with COSLA, and have asked them a series of routine questions. So I guess I have a snapshot to share. And yeah, Kathy sharing the mug was exactly the first thing I was going to do in that tagline, that if you've seen one state library, you've seen one state library. There is absolutely no universals, with the one glaring exception. If you have the Venn diagram of all the state libraries and their services, there's a pinhole that says LSTA, which is the Library Services and Technology Act, and they all get money from that program and administer it in some way. That's it. There you go. I'm done. But a little bit more of the generalizations that we can make, or at least some of the commonalities. Where the state library agencies live within the state government falls into about 7 generalized buckets. 14 are under the Department of Education. You've got some that fall under cultural resources, some that are under the Department of State, some that fall under the category of other. And I'm sure most of you are aware that Vermont's under the Agency of Administration. And there are 20, which is the largest single grouping, that are independent agencies. They're under their own banner, that report to different spots in the government. Some that report, actually only one that reports to the legislature, quite a few that report to the governor's office directly, and a handful that have an independent board or commission. So again, no commonalities. Other things that state libraries undertake, there are 10 states that are also the administrator of the state archives. Another 9 that are responsible for state record management. Thankfully, Vermont's not either of those. Every state has some engagement with the Talking Book Library through the National Library Service. And I know it's come up already, the ABLE program in Vermont. So that's floating out there. There's also the Center for the Book, which I know Vermont also has a hand in. There are 32 state library agencies that are the primary vehicle for their state Center for the Book. So the services that they provide break into a handful of broad buckets, but I'm only really going to focus on the things that are most common. Top of that list is statistic collection. Keeping track of what the local libraries within the state are doing and providing reporting on that. And that filters up through a number of different vehicles. The IMLS, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, collects data on the Public Library Survey. There's also a sister survey to that is the SLAA, which is the State Library Agency. I always forget the second A survey. Collecting data specifically on the state library agency. And those are things, particularly the SLAA is one that I look to frequently to try and find things I haven't open on my other screen, because I'm going to answer some of the questions that came up earlier today. Among some of the other services that are provided, the state library agencies are providing consultation out to local libraries. 43 states are involved in minimum standard setting or operational standard setting for the libraries within their state. And as mentioned, a majority have a hand in administration of aid out to localities in some form or function. E-rate, providing support to application to the E-rate program at the federal level is something that I know Vermont does and is relatively common. And resource sharing is something that's just blossomed in the last 20 years, going from not many states doing that to almost all states doing that. And that primarily takes the form of statewide purchase and coordinated access to databases, and even more recently, coordinated purchase and sharing of ebooks, electronic ebook resources. There's also direct program assistance that falls primarily under the header of continuing education. And we see that almost every state has some form or function in providing continuing education services out to librarians and library directors. And just about every state has some hand in the summer reading program in one way or the other, regardless of how that is funded. Really broad brush, as I see, if I needed to make a generalized statement across everyone, is that the state library serves as a coordinating hub for best practices in the administration of local library services. That's the boiled down point. So going to look into some additional statistics, particularly around staffing, because that came up earlier today. It, just like everything else related to state library agencies, it runs the gamut completely. So you have Minnesota on the low end with 5 FTEs, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, to Texas with 175. Texas is one of those states. There's also the state archives, so I'm sure that's a factor there. And to the point this morning about how does that relate to population, and is there a per capita? I haven't run the numbers, and if I had a few more minutes, I might have been able to compare those two columns. But I did pull the census data from 2020 and pulled a couple of numbers. So particularly looking at those that are similar to Vermont's 147,000 residents. So everybody that I looked to had slightly larger populations, but Wyoming clocking in at 580,000 has 19 FTEs, so really very comparable to the 18 in Vermont. North Dakota with a touch more, 779,000 people, but makes a pretty significant jump up to 28 people. And another one that jumped out at me, which was interesting, Hawaii, which has the smallest number of staff people with 4 FTEs, but serving 1.4 million people, and arguably one of the more challenging geographies with having to move between islands. So I found that the average staffing level at the state library agencies is 49 with a mean of 39. So I also can tell you, and this is not backed up with data. So this is with the disclaimer, this is clearly anecdotal. But I would say that every single state library agency, if we were to take their staffing levels and look back from 2000 to current, every single one of them is down. And even if we tightened that up and looked from 2010 till now, we're going to find the same thing. And the average seems to be in somewhere between 15 and 25%. They're all down from one reason or another. And yeah, I'm not going to speculate on where or why those may be. So that's kind of the quick and dirty overview that I have, and want to actually save more time to have a conversation and answer questions as best I can. I can share out, I'll drop in the chat when I'm done rambling, because I cannot multitask, but I will drop in the chat the link to where I found most of this stuff. I think was one of the links Kathy had provided in the meeting materials, but I'll provide out the link. Yep, that's where I'm pulling a lot of that stuff from. But I will also provide a link out to the SLAA data, and because it's done by a federal agency, it's held to the highest standards of the administration. So which means it's really heavy and cumbersome. And so it's a massive Excel file that you can download, but then there's a separate sister document that explains how to look it up and what all the column headings mean. And it took me longer than I will admit as a non-librarian to figure out how to find the data that I wanted in that chart, but I'll share it out because you are all smart library people that I'm sure can dance around that data faster and easier than I did.
Jeremy, thank you so much for being here. And I want to apologize. It's totally my fault that I spelled your name wrong on the agenda, and we will fix that.
Oh, I misspell it frequently, and so I didn't even notice.
I wanted to just jump in and invite people to raise their hands and ask questions. And I wanted to share with folks that there's something, well, there are 2 groups that Vermont State Library belongs to. So there's COSLA, which is the giant, all the chief officers, and Jeremy's the ED for COSLA. And then there's also COSLINE, which is the New England Northeast. It's the Northeast section. And Northeast is giant. It goes down to West Virginia or something?
Maryland, yeah. Maryland.
Yeah, it's like this whole giant crew. And so I am just going to say I received very little direct training from people outside the department in how to be a state librarian. And COSLA and COSLINE are basically it's like safety net, life raft, the support group, and they're really, really just a wonderful group of people. Sometimes you go to a conference and you just dread going, and I'm going to admit I was dreading going to the fall convocation because I don't know what I thought I would expect, but it was like just finding all of the people like me all in one place. It was so welcoming and so nice, and there's such a great group of people, and we are really among the state libraries. We're all trying for the same stuff, but in totally different ways, just in the same way that in Vermont libraries, we're all trying for the same stuff, but in totally different ways. And it's kind of just cool to see that. And it's great to have that fellowship. And certain people in our team have groups, like kind of like affinity groups of work that they're doing. Like Jeanette has a library advancement cohort that she's part of that love each other so much that they were meeting on like Fridays at 3 o'clock every week or something, like something insane like that. And they were like, gotta go to my meeting. Like Jeanette would never miss a Friday meeting. And Josh, who does our statistics in Vermont and who does, of course, the State Library Administrative Agency survey, and put that name in the chat because that's one of his babies. Josh has like a data wonk group that is wonderful and that I kind of wish I could join, and probably can. But there are these really great groups. There's a DEI group that meets. They're all different folks meeting. So we can kind of learn from others. I'm curious, Jeremy, you don't have to answer all of the details of it, but do you know anything about this interstate library compact? I'm thinking Karen Miller from Rhode Island will know about the interstate library.
What's the name again?
We have it mentioned in our statute in chapter 2.
Okay.
And it's called I have a printout of it. It is called the Interstate Library Compact. It dates from the 60s. It started in 1963. And there are 35 of us who signed it. I'm gonna check with Karen Miller. I bet Karen will know if anybody knows.
If anyone knows, Karen will know.
Karen will.
I will admit that's the first I've come across it, which, I've been involved with libraries for, I don't know, 12, coming up on 15 years. And I'm never surprised when there's a group or an association or anything related to libraries that I haven't heard of yet. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll find out. It seems like it might be helpful to us. And Karen Miller is the state librarian of Rhode Island, and she's like just a total boss. I don't know how to explain her. She knows all the things. She does all the stuff. She's really great at tracking national legislation and like letting people know things that are coming along that might impact us. And she also is part of that data group, I believe. And she's just Karen's everywhere. And in her spare time, she's like a band leader. So who's got questions for Jeremy about functions and roles of state libraries or any of the data or any of the information that he shared with us this morning? Anybody? You're so quiet sometimes. Come back on screen. I miss you. Susan, I see your hand.
Hi, thank you for this. This was really interesting. I'm still thinking about staffing levels, and I absolutely understand that there's no way to compare things completely. But one of the things that came up for me, particularly when you mentioned Hawaii, was wondering the more collectives or organizations or systems that are in place, does that tend to mean that there's less need for more staffing at the state level? So for instance, Vermont that has 185 individual standalone libraries, does that correspond to needing more from our state library, from the Department of Libraries, than people that have kind of more levels to reach out to?
Well, and Maybe. What's interesting, and I tend not to, usually don't throw Hawaii in because it's such an outlier. It is structured, the only other area that's structured like Hawaii is the District of Columbia, which the director is technically a state librarian. We won't get into their fight for statehood. But those are the only two places where the state library is also the administrative body for the public libraries. So every public library in Hawaii is essentially a branch. It is one. So yeah, I would think that it would be the reverse. You need more administration when you're direct service, but and that number of four does not obviously doesn't include staff at the individual libraries, but yeah, no correlation, and what the libraries are called on to do is just the state library agencies are just all over the board. As far as yes, with Minnesota with 5 people, there's just not the capacity. There's things you can't ask them to do with that many person hours.
Right. And probably there's not a lot of support for individual libraries and librarians when that's the case.
Right. With 5 people, essentially, they're meeting their statutory requirements to get the federal funding for the overseeing their LSTA funding. And interestingly, and I don't believe Minnesota is one of them, but there are a handful of states where they contract out. So Nevada. No, Utah. Utah is the host. They provide the talking book services to 8 different states through an interstate collaborative. So, yeah, there's a lot of different ways that that the requirements and their obligations to the state get accomplished.
Is there anything on the top of your mind that seems like it works really well in another state that you like here, if you have a chance, say, here's something that I think every state should do? Does something jump out?
Ooh, hopefully Kathy's nervous now. It's really, if you're going to give me a soapbox to stand on, the thing that I would say is not related to the state library agency. But before I came to COSLA, I was executive director of the New York Library Association for almost 10 years. The thing that I would point to is out of New York, and it's not just, hometown pride. Every single public library that holds a, charter through the state library has a path to direct ballot access and can go directly to the voters for the approval of funding. And I think that's tremendous, because anytime a library is funded through the municipality, it means that it's on the same budget document with siren services, your fire, your police, your ambulance services, and in Vermont, I would include, snow plowing services. And if we straight up look at Manslow, it's hard to argue, oh, no, the library means money. Well, we also need a new fire truck. And that's not a fair dichotomy, right? It's just not fair to have to fund those things. So anytime where you're able to go to the citizens within a library service area and say, would you be interested? Do you want to pay money for your library services? In New York, library budgets pass at over 95%. People say yes. So I'd rather ask separately and ask for a amount of money directly from the voters than be lumped in and have to fight with the town council against, and not against, but against a fire truck.
Right, exactly. That's an interesting way to do it.
Yep.
Kind of the difference between a municipal and an incorporated library here in Vermont at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yeah, New York has got even more some other interesting convoluted. They have a special district library where they can create unusual boundaries, and yeah. So, but literally every type of library, even the small association libraries that are similar to those in New York or in Vermont, have a pathway in statute to file petitions and get onto either a school district or a municipal ballot to ask for a separate levy for the library.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Sure.
Thanks for your questions, Susan. Jeanette Baer.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. It was very interesting. And I will second your comment about a separate funding article. We're a municipal library here at my library in Rochester. We were kicked out of the town budget about 5 years ago. And our budget as a separate article has passed so much easier than negotiating through the town budget process, and has passed practically unanimously every year. So I would second the, go it on your own.
Here.
Jeremy, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm a little curious because I know different states are organized so differently. And you've got New York State experience, and that's something that we sometimes are wondering about. So, and this is sort of in the vein of Susan's question. And again, I'm not trying to put you on the spot that you may, I'm not trying to lure you here, like, you know everything, you can do it. But I remember in New Jersey, for example, we had counties and we had regional cooperatives. And in New York, there are clearly library systems, and there are the special district libraries and things of this nature. So there's like a middle layer that we in Vermont don't have in anything. I mean, we have school districts, but aside from that, there are counties drawn on maps, but governance wise, there's not really much structure there. Do you have any sense of like what states we are like, or who else might be like us, or do you have a sense like, is New York just wonderful and we should look at what they're doing? And I don't know.
I don't think anyone says government in New York is wonderful in any regard. But what I guess I will share another document that I found. It's quite dated, but things, legal structures change slow. That is a little overview state by state of how those pieces are. In gross generalities, west of the Mississippi, you see far more county-based library organization, right? That it's even if there's multiple outlets, multiple branches, multiple spaces, there's still, the library of the county, which is clean and neat. But and you'll see more of a millage model, right, where you get whatever the mill is, you get 1 mill or 1 point whatever mill out of the local levy. And I think some of that, as a lifelong New Yorker, and I consider myself a New Englander, even though, technically, anyway. The organization for libraries, if you look again in gross generalities, as you head west, it's the difference between, if you look at the road system in LA versus the road system in Boston, right? Like we figured out like, oh, we're going to do it this way by the time you got to the West Coast. And things here, well, just maybe a volume piece is a good thing. In New York, there are 757 public library entities. That's not outlets, that's individual libraries. And I would always joke there's 757 libraries and 812 operational models, because literally any ridiculous thing you can think of is happening somewhere. So I guess that's maybe comfort to know that, however, the most obscure operational thing that's happening in Vermont, I'm sure it's happening somewhere in New York as well. But with 185 public libraries, it seems so manageable, right? When you're talking about 756, they diced up New York State into 23 regional systems, because interlibrary loan or bringing the directors together and setting regional policy was just too cumbersome with the geographic distance as well as just the number of individual entities.
Mhm. You know, before we finish up our conversation this morning, I think one thing that I want to be sure the working group is aware of is that when we're looking at the SLAA and when we're the annual SLAA, there's this like 2 year, I think, lag time at least on
Yep.
the charts and the reports.
Yep.
So it's really a little bit frustrating. It's done locally. We complete the survey locally, and then it takes years to parse the data and do the comparisons. And the public library survey that all of our public library directors are filling out, similarly, it will take months for us to get the data you all filled out so beautifully. It'll take months for Josh to like kind of gather that and go through and look for errors and connect back with people, and then for us to finalize our report to IMLS. And then it'll take quite a while for them to do their comparisons. There is something I've noticed that is a little bit wacky, which is that if you start looking at some of the data, you're really comparing like apples, pineapples, and maybe a horse. Like they don't actually align. So like if you look at the PLS, and when Jeremy said library outlet, that's what made this all pop in my head. Hawaii has like one library outlet. That's how they're listed, I'm pretty sure. And so we keep hearing and we keep crowing about we have more libraries per capita. And like people love to say it. But Hawaii, all of their public libraries are just the one library outlet. And that number people are referring to, I think, is from the PLS. And they're saying Vermont has the most libraries per capita. And it's like, yeah, what does that mean? That's not, it doesn't mean what you think it means, because a county system in another state might be coordinating. Like I know when I was in San Francisco Public had our 27 branches and then the main library and then mobile outreach services and incarcerated and everything else, all these unique work units. We were one entity.
Mm-hmm.
There are 28 buildings behind that one entity, but it's one entity. So we don't necessarily have the most library buildings per capita. It's not necessarily the case. That's like people misunderstanding. And then we also hear, like there was just some article about how great we are because we have the most books. Well, has anybody looked at the age of the books? Because we show up really high with age of books, but then we also show up really high with how many books we're borrowing from other states. We're like with North Dakota for how many books we're borrowing from other states. It's like us, Washington, D.C., and North Dakota. And April, you can correct me if I just got that wrong, because I think that's what it said. And it's kind of like, if we have so many books and they're so new, why are we having to borrow them from other states? So these numbers don't necessarily mean what we think they mean. It's probably true that we have the most, I think that like the spending, I haven't figured out yet what's wrong with the spending per capita on libraries, like if that's true or if that's not true, but certainly we have not many people and lots of buildings. So we might be paying a lot to maintain them all. Like, so, but when you're looking at the national data, it really doesn't, and then what we found out this year, as Vermont, for the first time in a very long time, changed our question, probably bothering every public library director who filled out the survey. We changed our questions to align with the national questions. We're not required to ask the same questions. The states can each ask the question the way they think it's meant. And also nobody at IMLS seems to have, it's by vote. Like I get to vote if we're going to change a question, but I'm not a data scientist. Like I don't know what the question means or how the people will respond to the question. So IMLS is doing something a little bit strange. So just keep that in mind. Like the statistics are helpful and the statistics are good for us to look at. But I know that we're all critical thinkers, and so we're going to just keep this stuff in mind when you're looking at this. And I'm wondering who's our person who's writing up structures and organizations. Trying to remember who our report writer is.
That would be me.
That would be you. So Susan, you are able to do it. You can do it, and we're here to help, because this is a little bit, yeah, it's a little confusing, right?
There's an awful lot of recommendations that we could make.
Yeah, absolutely.
There
And
are
I just,
improvements that could be made.
there are a lot. And I know that everybody here appreciates this opportunity, Jeremy, to hear from you. And thank you so much for coming today. And thank you for sharing everything you've shared with us. And I'll probably have to ask you some more questions offline to help Susan and to help our working
Absolutely.
group. But you know, we are the best of all the states. So we welcome you to come on over for a visit. And we're looking forward to seeing you and to working more with you. And I just really appreciate your being here today. And I know the working group does too.
Absolutely. No, it was my pleasure. And I'm sorry I went over on time.
Well, no, don't worry about that. We're okay.
Okay.
So we actually get a small break today, which is wonderful. So thank you so much for being here. We're going to pause for 10 minutes for our break. And everybody, just when you come back, if you can either say that you're back in the chat or put your camera on so that we can jump right in with our 11:30 speaker, who's going to be Michelle Robertson from ALA Ecosystem Initiative.
Kathy, I'll be back after the lunch break.
Okay.
Christopher.
Later, everybody.
Bye.
Hi, everyone. It is now 11:30 and we're coming back from our break. And I want to just make sure we've got all of our working group members back. So working group members, if you're not on screen, hi Jeanette, then please just share that you're here in the chat thread. I see some of you. Excellent. Okay, I think we've got enough to get started because I want to welcome Michelle Robertson to share with us. Michelle is here from the ALA Ecosystem Initiative. And Michelle, I'll let you introduce yourself. You have a very lengthy title and I don't want to get it wrong. So I'm going to just let you share who you are and feel free to just jump right in. We have 1/2 hour for your presentation. So you'll present for about 20 minutes and then we'll do Q&A for about 10 minutes.
Okay. Not even sure it's going to take that long, but we'll go with it. I'm Michelle Robertson. I'm an assistant professor in library media and education at the University of Central Oklahoma. Literally, my university is right in the middle of Oklahoma. Some members of the ecosystem subcommittee. Okay, the ecosystem is a subcommittee of COLA, of ALA's Committee on Library Advocacy. So I got started with the ecosystem about 3 years ago. This is actually I'm down to counting days now before I'm actually off the committee. After annual, I will be rolling off, and we've already started gearing people up to get them rolled on and ready to go. There's several of us were just at the Maine Library Association on Sunday, working with the Maine Library Association and several other stakeholders within Maine to kind of help get them started on this toolkit. The toolkit was created 4 years ago. As we know, ALA loves to get subcommittees going. One subcommittee created the actual toolkit, which I'll show you here in a minute. Another committee has then been out trying to work with different groups, kind of showing them the toolkit and what's there and how you can speak to legislators and others with a stronger one voice than if you just speak to yourself. I know personally in Oklahoma, we have a lot of pockets of very rural school districts and public libraries and even university libraries that don't feel like they have a strong enough voice to go to the legislator and speak on their behalf. But when they work outside of their silo, then they do feel like they have a stronger voice. And honestly, this is the first year within Oklahoma Library Association that during legislative day, I have felt like I had enough knowledge to speak on their behalf. So that's kind of a little bit about how all this got started and kind of the end goal of it. I think I'm going to share my screen. We'll see how this goes. If not, okay. Ta-da. Okay, can you guys see the toolkit now? Do you guys see the toolkit?
We can see a slide that says link to slides, tiny URL.
Sorry about that. Okay, you guys will get that at the end. I'll make sure I email it to Kathy so you guys can have access. Sorry about that. Okay, yeah, I was rolling through them earlier and I realized, oh wait, I started at the bottom. Okay, so let's get started here. So as I was saying, these are the different kinds of libraries. We're also looking to add, because state libraries obviously play a very important role in this. We're very fortunate in a lot of states to have the State Library Association step up and speak with us, especially on a day like advocacy days or legislative days. But it kind of all focuses into that one voice and where we have a stronger voice if we work together. Give me 1 second here. There we go. Okay, next. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, now my computer has just decided to show you them all. Let's go back up here. Hold on. I love tech when it works, but then when it doesn't, you're like, what the heck? Okay. Haha, here we go. Okay, so basically, I'm not going to take time to read this all to you, but this encompasses what we believe on it within the ecosystem subcommittee is that at a different point in everyone's life, they're going to be using some kind of library. You know, so our friends in the public library, you know, you get the kids in there for story time. And then when they come to school, we got it from K to 12. And then when they go to the university, they've got the university libraries. And then beyond universities, they'll actually return to the library for various reasons. Genealogy seems to be a really hot topic and has been for many years now. So there is a reason for everybody to know and to support libraries. This is a graphic that was created by Kathy Lester, who is the current president of AASL, and she created this one just to kind of show what we just talked about, is that there is at different points in your life, you're going to need a library, and you need to support libraries throughout your whole life. Some of the main goals that the ecosystem helps support are, of course, these common goals that we all know about: public access, love of learning, information literacy, inquiry skills, historical records, and strong communities. And then we kind of took those main 6 topics and we said, well, look, that's kind of basically like all of the core values within librarianship. These granted came from ALA, but you know, these support all libraries. And I promise you, if you haven't had a conversation with a library outside of your realm, these are all topics that you could use to start a conversation, because OLA, Oklahoma Library Association, 3 years ago, I would say we had a relatively strong ecosystem. But when we sat down and actually started talking about what these different keywords meant to us, we found out that while we were using the same terms, they didn't mean the same thing to us. So it actually, what I thought would be a 20-30 minute conversation turned into a 2-hour conversation. So it's very interesting. So this is just a place to start the conversation. If you need a place to start, this is a good place to start. Okay, so the continuum is, and like you're going to have access to the slide, so you can click on the links. Basically, the continuum was built around these 4, depending on who you talk to, I call them pillars, these 4 major concepts. One was leadership, collaboration, communication, and sustainability. You got to start with leaders, people who are willing to come together and try to forge an ecosystem. Obviously, communication is important, because you got to have to find a way to communicate with each other. And then the collaboration part of it is, you know, then you're going to have to find the time to work together to build that one voice, whatever that looks like for your particular ecosystem. And then sustainability, the first 3 take a lot of time. Even in Oklahoma, where we had a fairly strong ecosystem, it still took us quite a while, like several months, 4 to be exact, to kind of get everybody on the same page. Like I said, we all kind of understood the core concepts. Keywords, though, man, when we started defining some things like information literacy, to me as a K-12 librarian, I found out that meant something completely different for my friends in public library and for my friends in the university library. So it took us a while to kind of hammer that stuff out and literally get on the same page. After you spend that kind of time creating your ecosystem and getting it up and going, you need to make sure that there's a sustainability factor, that you have people that are going to be willing when the original leadership says, okay, we've got this thing up and going and it's now time for us to step aside and, you know, let it keep moving. Make sure that you're training those people as they're coming up. As I said, it's about time for me to roll off the ecosystem subcommittee. We started a year ago training people who will now take on our work and continue forward with this endeavor. So sustainability is, like I said, a key factor. Okay, this is one of the 4 pillars. One of the things that the group that created the toolkit thought was important was to create a rubric so to kind of give you an idea of figuring out where you are. I'll tell you that within Oklahoma Library Association, we personally felt like we were highly effective as far as leadership goes. We had a very strong leadership. But then, like I said, in communication collaboration, yeah, okay, we weren't quite so strong there. But this gives you a place to start. And there's one for all four of the well, tenets or pillars, depending on who you talk to. And it just gives you, I like this because it gives everybody a chance to kind of make their own evaluation. And then when you come together to say, okay, well, this is what I think, and this is why I think, you know, this is why I think we're in the evolving part of this particular rubric. It's just a great place to kind of get everybody on the same page and kind of start that conversation. Okay, next one. All right. So of course, unity across all library types in Vermont. Library advocates and your stakeholders, don't forget about them as you're creating your ecosystem. Sometimes I know we work within our silos, so much so that we just, you know, it's, you know, you may think to talk to other libraries within you, like within your community, but then you forget about your advocates and your stakeholders. And a lot of times, especially when it comes to legislative issues, they're going to be the ones that, you know, have more bang for the buck, so to speak, because they're going to be able to go to legislature and speak on behalf of all libraries, which of course, like we said, as to speak as one voice is always important. Okay, you will notice in the toolkit that there are several items like this one. This is an agenda building one. There's also one for, which we just used this last year, a advocacy one that you could use to build like your advocacy, you know, the core concepts that you're going to support for a year. There's also a calendar. We started with legislative day on our calendar and then worked backwards and said, okay, what are we going to do leading up to the actual date of legislative day to kind of help and get everybody on board. We quickly found some holes, like not everybody feels like they can go to their legislator and speak on either just even on the behalf of their own library system, let alone trying to speak on behalf of all libraries within the state of Oklahoma. So we found that, you know, kind of working together to create these things, we're also created what we're calling an advocacy boot camp of our own to help train those people who, librarians and, like I said, stakeholders who maybe don't feel strong enough at this point, but to help to give them tips and tricks on how to go talk to the legislators and to feel like they can be successful at that. So there's lots of tools like this one that will help. But this one, this is just an example that we mocked up real quick to use in different presentations. But basically, you know, for funding and advocacy for community awareness is, you know, the diversity and inclusion. Those are things that we can all get behind, we all understand, but you just need to have a conversation about what that exactly means to everybody that's going to be in your ecosystem. Okay, and this is one of those things that we created to work actually for face-to-face with groups, but I think it's a great way to actually come up with a possible work plan. So you need to obviously figure out your goal, the concrete steps, how you're going to measure those results, and then kind of any notes that you have. This for us kind of helped bring it into focus. It's one of those things, and the things that you see in here, and even the things that you see within the toolkit, you are free to take and tweak and do what you need to do with it. The one for Oklahoma doesn't look exactly like this one. This was just kind of a generic one that we created. So if this doesn't quite meet your needs, please feel free to tweak it in any way that you need to. Okay, so one of our original members of the ecosystem subcommittee said, hey, we need to have a 30-60-90 plan, which for those of you who don't know what a 30-60-90 plan is, it basically comes down to a lot of times, especially when you attend webinars, you're like, okay, great, this sounds wonderful. We want to get busy on this. And you get back from lunch and you hear about other things. And then you've got to deal with all the emails that you've so far managed to ignore, or phone calls, or whatever the case is. And then all of this falls to the wayside. So, but if you come up with an action plan of like, okay, this is what I'm going to do in 30 days. This is what I'm comfortable doing in 30 days. This is what I'm doing in 60 days. And this is what I'm doing in 90 days. It just gives you some kind of momentum and will help you move forward. I talked to Kentucky Library Association last fall in October at their conference, and they actually sat down and created, it was lunchtime right after I presented. So they actually sat down during lunchtime and created a 30, 60, 90 plan. Their 30-day plan took them a little longer than what they originally anticipated. So, but you know, that's one of the things I like about it. It's flexible. It's what it needs to be for you. It just gives you a place to start. And that's what I like about the toolkit in general. And then this is just, you know, actions that we must take about, you know, facilitating those connections across all library types and, of course, the stakeholders. To speak with one voice, and advocacy and collaboration is always important. And that we remember to recognize each other as you're building that one voice. You know, when you go to legislatures or to the board or whoever you may be speaking about, remember, you're not just speaking for yourself, you're speaking for all of us. When you get the link, you'll be able to click on, these are states that currently have a strong ecosystem and are moving forward. There's a couple of other states that we have not added yet. Washington State also has a strong ecosystem currently. Like I said, we just worked with Maine, so we expect to see Maine on this page shortly. So we would love to, you know, if there's anything we can do to help Vermont and help Vermont kind of, you know, get up on this page too, we will be more than happy to help you. And these are links of different things that we have created while we've been on the ecosystem since the fall of 2020. And it just kind of gives you, like I said, a place to start. You're free to take whatever you see here. The last two bulleted items are webinars that we have created that, you know, one of them, especially the last one, Together We Make a Difference, that one focused on book banning and kind of how to work within that as an ecosystem and to help prevent book banning in general. Okay, and that's it. That's all I have to share.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your sharing this morning, Michelle. So I'm going to open it up for working group members to ask questions or share what thoughts have come to mind for them as they've heard your presentation.
Trying to process it all real quick. Our state librarian is on our Oklahoma Library Association's advocacy committee, so she commits to helping us work with this, and we have found it. She has ways and means into things that we personally don't have. So she's been a trusted ally from the beginning for us. So.
Yeah, different states have different rules around the roles that the state library staff can play.
Right.
And in our state, there are even rules about which title I'm using when I'm playing. Well, not exactly rules, but
yeah,
it's like state librarian or department commissioner. So it's like it's a little, it's an interesting.
You get two business cards. Which one do I hand out? Yeah.
Working group members, don't be shy. Come on screen, ask your questions.
They're all hungry. Hi. And we've also noticed sometimes a lot, because it is so much that it takes time, people sometimes they reflect and then we start getting emails back. But yeah, that's how we pushed out to Jeremy, because Jeremy was actually the chairperson of ALA's Committee on Library Advocacy when this toolkit got started. And so we were like, Jeremy, we need your help. So.
I guess I'm kind of curious, and I hope I didn't miss it while you were talking, but how did the states that are kind of your participating states, how did they get activated? How did they, what steps does it take for a state to become sort of engaged in this? Because I feel like in our library environment, we have different streams of communication, and we have different sections of like Vermont Library Association, and one of our public written comments was saying, there are a lot of library organizations for a very small state. Like we've got the School Library Association, the Vermont Library Association. How did the dialogue get started, and how long did it take to organize? And
okay, so I'll just use Tennessee as an example. They got started, the conversations about how to kind of pull together as one voice had kind of already started. They within their main library association, the school libraries and academic libraries are all a part of that. I know that's not always the case, but they quite honestly had a book banning issue come up, and it was over an LGBTQ issue of the book. And so they quickly formed together and found legislation was getting ready to be voted on, and they pulled together within days and fought back within 36 hours, had found a way to prevent that legislation from going forward. So sometimes that's how it works. Sometimes, like in Maine right now, they're just trying to get everybody on the same page. So they used the pre-conference to kind of pull in their executive board and said, okay, and their stakeholders, and their school library association is not a part of MLA. So, we sent out an invitation to whoever wanted to participate, but they finally, it took them a couple of hours, but I think they all came out of that one after starting that conversation, that now I feel fairly strongly that they're going to start and continue. So it looks different for everybody. For Oklahoma, we already had our group kind of formed. We just needed to find a way, especially in communication and collaboration, to make that part stronger. So all it takes is a couple of people willing to kind of start the charge up the hill and to start the conversations and to say, okay, who wants to participate? Because at the end of Maine Library Association, a Google form was sent out and said, if you want to participate and continue this conversation, let us know. They had 12 people that said, yes, we want to get involved. Okay, those 12 people are going to be the ones that charge up the hill and start that conversation and get it rolling. So so it's different for everybody. That's why the tools look different for everybody. The examples we have from Tennessee look very different than what they do from like Virginia. And we've also talked to New Jersey now. New Jersey's got things going on too. So yeah, we're working with them and their ecosystem as well. So it looks different for everyone. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I'm curious for some of the members of the working group who are positionally you're here on the working group as representatives of the different organizations, many of you. Is there already communication in Vermont between VISLA and VLA and between the academic libraries? Karen McCullough.
Sorry, I was eating my lunch as this was happening, so hopefully I don't have lunch on my face.
My kind of librarian, we eat on the go.
Hopefully, well, my own personal take on this is that Vermont already does this pretty well. I feel like people on the working group might disagree with me, but I feel super connected to my school library community, and then connected to my public library community because I'm a citizen. So I feel like there are good connections already in Vermont.
What about your university libraries?
So that's a weaker point, I think.
Yeah. It was for us too. That's why I was asking. I was like, yeah, I think those two work together really great. And then our poor friends at the university library were like, well, what about us? I was like, oops.
Right. Although they're represented on the working group, which is great. And I do have, I have personal connections because of things that I've done at state universities, but I feel like I don't know if I'd say they are siloed, but they are a little separate, but their missions are a lot different too. So
Exactly. Yes.
You know,
And that was the
I
other
don't
thing
know.
we had to get up and over. And the strategic plans look different. And yeah, so that's what I mean. That's why I thought was going to be a short, simple conversation turned into a 2-hour conversation. And we had to stop at 2 hours because we all had other things we had to go do. But and that's why it took us almost 4 months to actually get everybody on the same page. So yeah, they're like, yeah. So it's always great to have those conversations already started. I think it makes this part easier. There are a couple of states that don't want me to talk about them directly, so they are having a harder time because they haven't had these kinds of conversations, and they tend to be leery of each other. So I'm like, okay, well, somebody's going to have to step across the line here and go make friends. So, but yeah.
So yeah, and I guess I understand why the siloing would happen, where people are just trying to like do their own thing and
survive.
do what they can do inside their job, right? And everybody's busy and stressed.
Sure.
I'm not sure that I don't know if I want to say I don't understand it, because I understand how it could happen, but I feel like in Vermont we're very willing and always looking for opportunities to sort of like reach across the aisle, like school librarians and public librarians or whatever. They're always working together on stuff. And I don't know if that's because, our public libraries and our school libraries are often like, they're in the same community. Like, we're serving the same families. I serve families that are in my community because their kiddos are at school, but they're the adults in that family are using the public library. So we're all kind of, overlapping
together.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. I'll stop talking now, but I feel like, and other working group members might feel like I'm way off base, but I do feel like we have a good already sort of starting point for
the foundation has been laid.
Yeah, for like sort of
easier
as you were. Yeah.
I
Thank
see
you very much for the presentation too, by the way. That was amazing.
Okay. Have a good day.
Denise.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It was great. It's interesting, the idea about how can we better collaborate. Like, I'm from the university library, so that's
Our friends,
where I'm coming from. But we can't license. It's very difficult for us to license beyond affiliation to the institution without it being incredibly expensive. So even though we're open to the public and anyone can come in and use our online materials in the building, I'm not sure. It would be interesting to have a conversation about what else we could be doing for the other libraries within the state.
Yeah, I'll speak from my own personal experience in two different realms. One is a K-12 librarian, and then now working at the university. And my office is housed in the library, even though I'm faculty, but that's a whole separate story. Basically, just laying those inroads early, we have found that if we start with our freshmen and just invite them on campus and they see the library and they get to make those connections early on, that in 4 years, when they show up on your campus, they'll wander in. And the university as librarians have been keeping track of the conversations that we have when they're freshmen, the students that show up 4 years later, and how their comfort level of just even dropping into an instant messaging, which we have on our library catalog page, they just seem more comfortable doing that than if they had never had those conversations before. And even for our kiddos that we're a tier 3 university, so even those that go to a tier 2 or a tier 1, they still feel more comfortable starting those conversations. And it's always about that conversation, kind of starting it there. They are aware, they're exposed, especially as seniors, to the different databases and, kind of how all that works. But we fortunately, most of the school districts in Oklahoma have access through the State Library Association, the different databases, and then depending on the school district, we'll have access to different databases as well. So, but yeah, just that comfort level, because so often the kiddos that don't have that, and this is my own area of research, they flounder that first year at the university because they don't know They don't know what questions to ask. They don't know who to go ask. They know they're supposed to be doing research, but what they did in research in high school doesn't look like what it's supposed to at the university level. So that's kind of where that part kind of, for us at least, fits in there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think my colleague Maria could probably speak to this, but I believe that there is connection with the high school population and the University of Vermont. That's not my department, so
okay,
it's not my permanent department. Maria's in that department, and I think we're building. There's actually a position that's being developed that would do more of that. So with that might be an opportunity in the next year or so. It's to engage, the ability to engage even more with our school population when this position becomes available and is posted and filled.
The other group we looked at was the non-traditional students. And they'll come on campus with their freshmen, sophomores, and they're like, oh, well, I think I can handle this maybe a little bit better. There's actually somebody here that will help me with whatever that might be. So that's, and the non-traditional student, our numbers have gone up as well in enrollment in that area because of the library. So.
Yeah, I know a lot of university libraries also have personal librarian programs, which can sometimes help bridge or create that sort of comfort level in going to a librarian. But we don't have enough staff right now to pull that off completely. But we're talking about modified ways to maybe provide that for certain populations.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in for a second, I think too that in Vermont we're lucky that many of our academic libraries are locations where people can easily just walk on campus. And I know when I was a kid, I used to feel like I was sneaking into the library at UVM, and that was a sort of fun feeling to sneak in, but apparently I never needed to sneak and I was always welcome. And so part of it may just be that making sure that Vermonters are aware of the resources and that they have access and that the institutions are welcoming. And so making sure that the public libraries know that. I know that in talking with the dean at UVM and in talking with members of this working group who work there, for example, UVM has the medical library for the whole state, and anybody who has a consumer medical question or whatever it may be, like, we're all welcome to go there. But maybe some people don't realize that we could ask a question or that we could go in. And I know at the department, we have a relationship with Vermont Law and Graduate School with the legal reference. So that's like there's a grant program there to help us fulfill statute. But it's funny because we are promoting it all the time and it's getting used really well. But many people still don't know about it. And so sometimes it's just really promoting that existing connection, I think. And we recently were hearing from so many community members about how they kind of thought of the Vermont State College libraries as their, I mean, I wasn't hearing about it necessarily, but in the press, everybody was talking about that it's their public library. Like they think of it as their extra public library and they go and they use it and it supplements when their public library is open. And I think that these resources are really being used locally in ways, and Middlebury College, which is a private institution, has been such kind of a foundation of our interlibrary loan system for all these years. So I think we are really we see that we have good connections, but we may not have formalized some of them. So maybe through the working group, we can, now that we've got representatives talking, we can just kind of keep the dialogue up and think about that a little bit more. So it's kind of exciting to think of how this could continue. And it's also time for lunch. It's time for lunch. So I'm going to thank you, Michelle, for your presentation. Thanks for being available to come meet with us today and to share what you're up to. And we'll most likely be reaching out because how could Maine be ahead of us on stuff? What the heck? So,
sorry, yeah, Oklahoma and Texas were having the same battles. That's what I'm like, we're with you.
Well, we really appreciate you coming to join us, and we look forward to talking with you again. And working group members, go off camera, mic yourself, eat your lunch, take good care of yourselves, and I will see you back at 1 o'clock. I'll put a message in the chat about where we've gone in case anybody comes to the meeting while we're not here.
Wonders where you are. Yeah. Have a good day. Bye.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.